Diddy trial prosecutors put in an opposition to Diddy's bail request, and the prosecutors say they're actually looking for a more lengthy sentencing than what they originally thought. In this opposition, the prosecution is laying out the fact that the judge already denied Diddy's bail for being a violent person, and they hone in even more into Diddy's alleged violence against people. Prosecutors are saying that Diddy has actually been lying when he said that he didn't commit violence between his breakup with Cassie Ventura in 2018 up until 2024 with his incident with Jane. Let's go ahead and jump right into this motion. The government says, despite the court's clear ruling that the defendant must be detained pending sentencing following his conviction on 2 felony counts, the defendant moves again for bail. The defendant's detention pending sentencing is mandatory. There is no exceptional circumstances justifying his release. Even if there were, the defendant cannot demonstrate by clear and convincing evidence that he is not a danger to the community. This court properly denied the defendant's request for bail on July 2nd of 2025, and the defendant has failed to present any reason for the court to reconsider its ruling. The court should deny the defendant's motion on this again on that basis alone, but then they get into listing more reasons. The defendant has failed to meet the strict standard for reconsideration. As an initial matter, the defendant's motion is untimely under Rule 49 because the motion was filed 27 days after the court's July 2nd, 2025 bail determination. The defendant fails to meet Rule 49, which is a 14-day deadline. Go on to say that Diddy has failed to show any exceptional reasons why he should be released on bail waiting sentencing. Even setting aside the defendant's failure to meet or even address the proper standard for a motion for reconsideration, the defendant motion still fails. As this court previously found, because the defendant was convicted of felonies under Chapter 117, his detention is mandatory, pertinent to the Bail Reform Act. This is where they really go in and they start blasting Diddy, saying that he poses a danger to others. The defendant fails to establish by clear and convincing evidence that he does not pose a danger to the community. It's impossible for the defendant, having repeatedly conceded his propensity for violence at trial, to demonstrate by clear and convincing evidence that he poses no danger to any other person or the community. Noting the defense full-throttled in its closing argument and told the jury that there was violence here, and domestic violence is violence. Trial record has evidence of the defendant's acts of violence towards others. The defendant's decade-long relationship with Cassie Ventura was defined by his repeated acts of violence and abuse. Defendant's temper and violence were unpredictable. The defendant frequently punched, kicked, dragged Miss Ventura, leaving her bruised and cut, with black eyes and busted lips. This abuse often occurred during freak-offs, including the defendant's assault of Cassie Ventura at the Intercontinental Hotel, which was captured on video surveillance. Cassie Ventura and other witnesses testified to numerous acts of brutality by the defendant against her. In addition, the defendant was also violent towards several of Cassie Ventura's friends who witnessed his mistreatment of Cassie Ventura, including Mia, including Brianna Bongolan, including Carrie Morgan. The defendant was also violent towards Gina Hun, with whom the defendant was in a relationship with at the same time as Cassie Ventura. More recently, the defendant brutally attacked Jane in June of 2024, also in the context of a freak-off. Jane testified at trial she initially initiated the physical confrontation with the defendant. She repeatedly locked herself in rooms in her homes to protect herself from the defendant. The defendant kicked down each door. The defendant also kicked Jane's legs out from under her, picked her up in a chokehold, punched her in the face twice, punched her and kicked her repeatedly when she was on the ground curled up in a ball, smashed her face into the ground 3 times while she was showering, resulting in Jane losing her balance and falling to the ground. Jane was left with a black eye and bruising and welts on her head. The defendant, who is significantly larger in size than Jane, had no visible injuries from the altercation. The defendant's claims that his violence against Jane was somehow provoked is disgraceful. Moreover, the fact that the defendant committed this vicious attack just 3 months prior to his arrest, while he was aware that he was under federal investigations, highlights, as the court concluded, a disregard for the rule of the law and the propensity for violence. Defendant contends that he does not pose a danger because the trial record does not reflect acts of violence by the defendant between 2018, when he ended his relationship with Cassie Ventura, up until 2024, when he viciously assaulted Jane. But the defendant's suggestion that he went several years without inflicting violence on another person simply is not true. The defendant did engage in several acts of violence between 2018 and 2024, and we don't know what that is because it was blacked out. Although this evidence was not presented at trial, the court is free to consider it in assessing the defendant's dangerousness. The defendant's extensive history of violence and his continued attempt to minimize his recent violent conduct demonstrates his dangerousness, and he is not amendable to supervision. The defendant utterly fails to establish by clear and convincing evidence as required that he does not pose a danger to the community. The defendant also fails to establish by clear and convincing evidence that he is not a flight risk. The defendant faces significant penalties for his crimes of conviction. As raised in the government's July 2nd of 2025 submission, the government's initial view was that the defendant guideline range was 51 to 63 months in prison. The government is continuing to assess the sentencing guidelines and expects that the appropriate guideline range will be substantially higher. So not only are they saying that Diddy has been lying this whole entire time, and they put something right here to say he is a violent person and he's been a violent person, which is the reason the judge denied it already. They're also saying that he failed to do it in the time he needed to, and now they're saying, look, we're actually going to be trying to get a higher sentence than what we already initially said in the first place. But y'all let me know what you guys think about all this in the comments.